Hi there everyone, hope you're doing well today. One thing we don't understand very well in our modern world is boundaries and their value. We tend to want to break apart boundaries in the mainstream culture. They're seen as always bad. Now you could argue this may have come from poor religious teaching back in the day. They may have removed the dimension of love from teaching around boundaries, the wisdom, the spiritual vitality, and that meant that people shot to the other side to oppose it because they thought they'd find freedom there. Of course, that's not really going to work. You're just going to the extreme. But I think when you really go through a breakdown of sorts, you will start to realize the true value of boundaries. I've spoken about this in my own life. Towards my late 20s, I was just headed in the wrong direction, chasing women, drinking all the time, working a job I wasn't really that passionate about just to, get going in the world. And it meant that I just hit a wall. I thought I can't go any further with my identity as it is. And part of that breakdown really was the breakthrough to a new sense of who I really was. My soul deepened into its true energy, a more spacious arena for me to exist in. And in my practical life, my day-to-day life, I started implementing lots of boundaries. I was guided to do that by good spiritual teachers. Things such as my behavior, what I was living for, all these sorts of things. And it showed me the value of living this way and why boundaries can equal a very healthy life when you implement them. Of course, in Christian language, boundaries really are something like the love of the Father. That's why it's God the Father. He who looks over us all and shows us the way. And if we go against that, we're going to really find a great lack. Well, a great lack in general, but we're really going to lack a lot of structure, and that can lead to all manner of pain. Even Christ himself is called the Logos in the Gospel of John. The Logos, of course, is a Greek word. You'd see it more in someone like Aristotle. It means something like reason, order, balance. And that's what Christ represented. Now, that isn't just do whatever you like whenever you want, The Logos is something more like living in the right way. A modern Westerner could probably understand that as something more like karma. It's not karma, but it's a way to understand it. And why I'm saying all of this is, while I would say I have come to really respect boundaries, and that means respect tradition and learn that we need a tradition to be the spine for us as individuals and a culture, it means I've become more comfortable with conservative ideas, especially conservative Christian ideas. And I think it's interesting to say this because that will mean, in the eyes of the world, you're, this right-wing draconian who just hates everyone. It's reductive, but it's the way the modern liberal world sees things. And I've always found this very fascinating, because as someone who would be labelled right-wing in this day and age, I've never really been drawn to the economic side of the right. It's not that I'm particularly against it. It's just what has spoken to me is soul. It's, again, the correctly positioned boundaries for personal and collective flourishing, these sorts of things. It's beauty. People like Roger Scruton were a big influence on me. But when you get the economic right, I think there's something in there. While I can admire it for the intricacies of the economic system and so on, or the arguments around liberty, I think it does promote a sense of hyper-individualism, if you will. And I think the material starts to take precedence over the spiritual, the cultural, and the collective. That means meaning and soul, if you like, drowns beneath the material realm, and everything becomes about simply what you can amass on this world, which is exactly what Jesus tells us not to do. But perhaps my biggest issue with all of this is the development of the modern corporate guy, and that has swamped the Western world. And I think the way we could explain this is the guy who's well put together, never really seems to falter, sharp haircut, nice shiny white teeth, and the sort of guy who just gets on with his nice car and his good job. Now, there's nothing wrong with that in principle. And there's nothing wrong with being well put together in principle, especially if you're interested in personal development, you want to get a woman, or you want to get a good job as part of life. But the downside of it is that I think it almost makes us distrust this idea of darkness, of falling apart. That's almost like the worst thing you could do. I don't want to be seen to fall apart. I'll look stupid. You've got to look like you're together at all times. Now, I'm not trying to say that we need to open the asylums and all the people with, severe mental health problems need to come out. That's not what I'm saying. I understand people can have severe mental health problems. My brother took way too many psychedelic drugs and had them and ended up dying. I know some people need help. The point is, I think that for the mass society, we've lost the point in understanding why we sometimes feel broken and why we need to feel broken. Now, this isn't going to appeal to everyone. A lot of people will just be in the world, doing whatever the dictates of the age demand. A lot of people think they have their own views, but in reality, they're just replicating the views of the age. That's why I'm mistrusting of the right-left dynamic to a large extent. But anyway, the point I'm really getting to here is sometimes in our lives, if we really open the door to the true spiritual path, it will mean we will feel broken. We will feel mad. We will feel deeply pained. We will feel like we're losing our lives sometimes. As Jesus says, it's he who loses his life that will find him. And again, this is not just a meaningless, pithy saying. It's a mystical teaching for what happens when the real spiritual door opens within. And it always opens it up with darkness. Why? Well, because we're living in an illusion. We're in our own small world. You could call it human-centric world. Just take me as an example. Everything is filtered through Richard's mind, Richard's experience, Richard's ideology. Now that's fine on one level, on the human level, but when we start really opening the door to the true nature of being, we can see that this is a highly biased, highly fragmented understanding of reality, which is God himself as true reality. Now, when that door starts to open, it can feel like you're being swallowed by that deeper source of life. I've experienced that myself. I was walking through London Bridge Station once, thinking I was going absolutely mad because I've been engaging in lots of spiritual work, but I could feel whatever Richard was starting to fall away somewhat or lose its power in comparison to the deeper instinct of being or the deeper reality of being. Now, once I went through that period, a big panic attack came out for me, but once I went through that, a great peace overcame me and was there for about 2-3 months. I had some major existential issues before that. Personally, I could not come to peace with how something could come from nothing. It was my own battle. But I had to realise I couldn't answer that question on the intellectual plane. That could only be discovered spiritually through the heart. Now I would say both something and nothing are sort of misnomers, they're illusions, but that's a topic for another video. The point I'm making here is I had to go through that state of feeling mad because my mind couldn't grasp the yearnings of my heart. And then once I'd gone through that process, peace overcame me and the mind quietened down and I was ruled by the heart energy. Now, I'm not trying to make out I'm perfect. I am, like any other Christian, a sinner. And I have sank back into worldly me at times and spiritual me at other times. It's a journey. And I think most of us are like that. But the point I'm making here is that in the modern era, we don't really allow ourselves these journeys. And I understand that some people are mentally unwell, but other people to me aren't mentally unwell and they're very happy to call themselves mentally unwell. I've seen this all my life. People with, anxieties, depressions, these sorts of things. Now again, it's not I don't have sympathy for these people, but very often we look at it all through this Freudian lens, something to be fixed. They're not normal. And then what we've got to do is, psychoanalysis or whatever. And again, maybe that can be right in certain times of your life. But broadly speaking, very often our depressions, our anxieties, our concerns, our feeling that we're just falling apart and we don't know which way to go. Well, these are gifts. These are things to be embraced. And we can run off into all manner of substances, either illegal or legal, be they drugs or alcohol or medication. And again, if you desperately need these things, fine, that's up to you. But I do think a lot of the time, very often, there are opportunities for us to learn through our challenges. Very often we have to be opened up. And if we can answer these deep pains, these deep yearnings of the heart, if we can go through these challenges, if we can endure the falling away of what is our finite self, and the wisdom of the Spirit can come through, we realize that God often is breaking us in order to make us. And when I say make us, it's really his light that starts to shine through all the more. That's the true meaning of being born again. It's not just simply saying I'm a Christian now, at least in my opinion. I think that's a trap of modern institutionalized Christianity. The true born again is recognizing the eternal Christ nature, and we can institutionalize that, and we should institutionalize it, but we can over-institutionalize it. So we think all it means is just a change of your mind, and that's another problem you get with, especially the religious world. It just becomes another ideology that you argue for, rather than a spiritual reality which truly transforms and changes you. That's the real spirit. That's the real Christ manifest. So the point I'm getting at here is very often we have to be broken to discover the true way, which is God's way, not our way. The ego must fall beneath God's ultimate wisdom. Again, we could call that conscience. We could call it karma. We could call it order. But that almost translates into our day-to-day lives. There's a lovely saying, I can't remember who it was, but an old Christian saint. And someone said to him, look, what is the ultimate law for me to do in life? And he said, you only have to remember one thing, and that's you must love and do whatever you like. Because what he means is if we're in the root of the source, in God's love, we don't have to worry about all of the intricacies of the day, because we're acting from love and we'll be guided. Because we'll have that natural balance within us, the natural logos, the natural boundaries. And sometimes, the boundaries will need to be really released so you can spread out at times. Other times you'll need tight boundaries, the narrow way as Christ calls it. You'll need to turn away from the things of the world, and every one of us is going to have challenges there. For some it might be success, for some it might be money, some it might be women, some it might be drugs or gambling or whatever it is. Or anger even. There'll be something we have to turn away from in order to grow. It's why Jesus told the rich man to give up his wealth. He's not saying having money is bad in and of itself. He's saying if it controls you, and if it's controlling your life so you can't enter the kingdom of heaven, then it's got to go. And again, that man walked off crying. We don't really hear from him again. But that rich man either did get rid of his money and followed Christ, or he stayed with his money, his worldly treasure, but then he really would have lived a life of pain in the long run. And we've all seen that archetype, the rich man who is dead inside. Again, I'm not bad-mouthing money there. You can have money and be happy. It's just if it's controlling you or not. So the point of all this video here is to try and emphasize the openness we have to our own challenges. If we run from them, they will live in us as sort of defective demons, and they'll come out in all manner of weird behaviours. Again, an anger issue, OCD, all these things, because it's a part of us that's not addressed. And that's why we do need these spaces to go through these journeys of healing, growth and learning. And not only does that bring us back to the true source, it also makes us who we truly are, the men we really are. Only God can define what that is for us. Now, given where we are right now in the Western world, we've always needed that process as individuals. It's part of our spiritual growth, especially as men, especially when we get to our adult life as men. But it seems to me the whole culture needs it right now. The whole of the West is locked in this materialistic, zombified mindset of simply thinking if it can just amass enough treasure in the world, if it can have the right ideology, if it can be seen as well put together, if it can be seen as more moral than the other person, then you'll be all right. But none of it's true. Politics doesn't matter in reality. What matters is your spiritual state. And when you're truly, if you like, on that journey of evolution there, then what you need to say and do in the world will become clear. Now, I don't think it's something we can avoid now, because we're just in a decline, culturally and individually at the moment. And that means it's time to embrace, this sense of falling apart, breaking apart, because that's what allows the renewal to happen. It's what allows us to pull away all the untruth, and the great light can shine forth. Now, I think that will happen culture-wide. It's going to get messy over the next few decades, let's say, but it will shine through again in the end. But that begins with us. Now, if you are interested in learning more about this, do join the Substack, because I'm going to hold a free call down the line about the work I'm doing. And second to that, do subscribe to this channel if you're new. And other than that, keep that heart open. Very often we're closed to some of the greatest lessons we could possibly learn, and we really shouldn't be. Enjoy the rest of your day. We'll speak again soon.